progress.
Okay. All right, welcome to the Needham Board of Health meeting on February 16th. This meeting is being held under the Chapter 107 of the Acts of 2022, known as an act relative to extending certain state of emergency accommodations. It was passed by the General Court, signed into law by Acting Governor Karen Polillo on July 16, 2022. That led to legislative action, revised section 20 of chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, and in so doing provided modifications to the Massachusetts open meeting law, which allows for flexibility to hold remote only and hybrid meetings while preserving public access and where appropriate public participation. Currently, that additional flexibility will expire on March 31, 2023, unless additional legislative action occurs. As part of today's remote-only meeting, all votes will be heard by roll call. It's not a remote-only meeting type. Welcome to our meeting. We have a public comment period. Does any member of the public wish to make a statement before we start our meeting? None. Then we'll move on to a review of the minutes of the December 16th and the January 7th meeting. So we'll start with December 16th. Does anyone have any comments or concerns about those minutes?
Yes,
Okay,
we actually held those for edits to page 5, and I don't see that any edits were made there.
So I had put in between the second and third paragraphs that you clarified your intent state that the duplicative of efforts by the state. Is that how you wanted it?
No, the paragraph before sounds very pejorative, which is not the intent of this. It still sounds pejorative.
That hasn't been changed from what was done before.
I know that's
Okay.
that's the issue, right? I mean, the tone of that just makes it sound like, it is dismissive, which is not at all the case. That's what basically what you put in here is exactly what should be in there.
Okay,
What's above that really shouldn't be in there, not in minutes anyway.
okay.
do you wish to suggest a revision?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, if you want
Yeah.
well, no, I mean, I can edit that offline. I can certainly work with Tim to do that.
Okay.
Yeah, and then do we vote at the next?
Okay. So then we'll hold off the vote on these until we see the revision that you submit. Okay. So we'll postpone that. We come to the meeting of January 17th. And are there any comments on those minutes?
Yes.
Okay.
Page 3, first paragraph, line 3. Instead of ER, refer terms ED.
Yeah.
I know that may be common parlance, but by golly, any organization I'm part of is going to get it right.
Okay.
So they
I'll
do
second that. All right.
You mean you guys work in more than a room?
Yes, yes. The phrase is, I am an emergency physician. I work in a department with many rooms. If you remember that phrase, you'll always get it right.
Yes.
The other revision is on page 4, second line from the bottom. Instead of the word useless, I would just substitute the word futile. If that really gets the intent of this.
Does anyone have any objections to those changes? No. Then if there's no objections to those changes, I suggest that we entertain a motion to approve the minutes with the changes that Stephen has recommended. Motion to approve those changes. Okay, second. Second, John. All those in favor? Aye. 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 We don't need to call the roll on that.
There you go.
Okay. All right, so that is the review of the minutes. We're a little bit ahead of ourselves. Maybe.
First for everything.
Doesn't happen too often.
So it's entirely at the board's discretion. They can take the tobacco compliance violation hearing now or wait technically until the 6:15 mark.
I would recommend taking it now, but does anybody have an objection to that?
Nope.
No. Okay. Hearing none, then we'll open the hearing on the tobacco compliance violation. The underage sale of tobacco product. And you want to start with that, Sharon?
Okay, so we do have Julie Mercer here. Do you want to come up to the table and we can kind of. So as you saw in the summary of the compliance checks, we did do a round of checks at the 6 establishments that sell tobacco on the 31st, and we worked with an underage student. Again, same protocols. We had their ID, leave it in the car. We gave the student money. We asked the student to ask for a certain specific tobacco product. And we did this for all 6 checks. And at the auto shell station, we had a sale that was made. It was around 3:30 p.m. So we have the owner here to give his side of the story and to talk to the board about what changes can be made and what future things you could do to help prevent that.
Sure, thank you. So first, I'm very sorry and I do apologize. You know, it's definitely not something that we do or intend to have done or anything like that. And second, I do want to say thank you to the board for actually conducting these tests because I think it is a very useful thing. And you know, there's really nothing I can say in my defense except for we really had a hard time finding employees, and I actually found one, and his English wasn't that great. So I thought I conveyed everything correctly, but apparently not. So, you know, from here on out, like I'm going to have weekly training sessions with him just so he really understands. And we're going to do our best not to do this again.
Okay, well, thank you. Appreciate that. You've had a good record, I believe, up until now.
Yeah.
So I'm sure it's one of those things that just happens, unfortunately.
Kara, it's correct that there's never been a tobacco.
It was one that was back in 2014. That was what we.
But nearly a decade of.
Right.
Yes.
It's 9.
Does anyone else want to comment? Okay. So then, I guess what we need to do is talk about how we're going to deal with the violation. So,
Mr.
Tim, do you
Chair.
want to explain what the
Sure. So one thing that we can do as a public health division is we can work to translate some of our tobacco materials into additional languages as a way to help vendors. Because obviously it is a challenging work environment and hiring staff has been and continues to be a challenge. So that's something that we can do and we will do to make things easier for the vendors in the town. The Board of Health, as the board knows, has a regulation in place for underage sale of tobacco products. The board has decided and has debated publicly that it will have defined penalties. And those defined penalties specify for the first violation, a sales permit suspension for 1 week and a fine of $300. In the past, the board has sometimes chosen to forego the fine, which is at its discretion. But it has stuck to and has made it a shall, not a may, impose a week-long sales suspension.
I understand that. Comments, anyone?
And the week can be chosen by the vendor, is that correct?
We usually, if the board decides, it's usually left up to Tara as the assistant health director to work with the vendor to determine when is an appropriate time.
Okay.
So I'm going to move that, in light of the otherwise exemplary record that we waive the fine.
Okay. Any second on that?
I second that, and I appreciate your coming here and being transparent with us.
Thank you.
All of that, any other comments? Okay, then I'll take a vote on that. All in favor of waiving the fine of keeping 7-day suspension?
You have a motion and a second, or?
Yeah. Motion.
So I will make a motion to waive the fine, institute the 7-day suspension.
Okay. Second on that?
Second.
Okay. All right, all in favor of the motion? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the motion carries. Thank you.
I understand, yeah.
And we can coordinate that, we can do that. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Okay, staff reports, I guess we'll move into those. Start with Alan, yes.
So for the month of January, we had our usual 48 volunteers. Unfortunately, one of our longtime volunteers who passed away. That was hard on us, but we had a substitute volunteer stepped up to be a full-time volunteer. We delivered 835 meals to 47 clients. 40 of them were Springwell clients, 7 were private pay consumers. One of the clients, Springwell clients, she is still in long-term assisted living style housing. She has decided to no longer be on the program because of it. She's just not sure of her long-term plans. We had one new client who is a private client, and one person did cancel the program. No 911 calls, which was great. I did include a flyer about the small repair grant program that is being done by the Needham Affordable Housing Trust. And one of our, just sent it to a few of the private clients that qualified for it. There was very specific criteria, and one of them responded saying, I had no idea about this. This is great. So she was going to apply. That's mandated.
But I just got who the name of the person who passed away.
I'm sorry.
Who passed away here?
Barbara.
Which on is fine. That's okay. Well,
Barbecue set.
oh, barbecue set. All right,
Very large loss.
yes, you've been around a long time.
Yeah. Very sudden.
Okay, so we move on to the emergency management.
Good evening, everyone. So for our active shooter preparedness, we've solidified our materials and a date as well for our joint tabletop exercise with Babson and Nolan colleges and the town of Wellesley. So that's going to take place May 25th. Then in addition to that, the Needham Police and Fire are looking at doing the internal drills during the week of April vacation. We have submitted our application for the Hazardous Materials Emergency Preparedness Grant. That's a $5,000 competitive grant that would be used to get DPW staff trained in hazmat awareness, which was a training need that we identified in our previous exercises. So that is a competitive grant, and the grant application period has closed now. So we're just waiting to hear back from MEMA on that. And then we sent out requests for quotes for a contractor to write our emergency sheltering plan with the emergency management performance grant funds. We didn't get any quotes back by the due date yesterday. So we're going to follow up with that and try and get someone quickly. Any questions for me?
I think you're doing very well. Thank you.
Thank you.
That is moving right on. So leave this one here.
He is online.
Oh, he is. Oh, okay.
I'm looking to a
So
panel.
does he make his report?
Yes, so Tala will be rejoining as a panelist in a moment.
Yeah, we're a little ahead. Let me just move ahead.
Just one moment, here he is. Tala, can you hear us?
Yes.
Can you give your update?
Oh, yes. Good evening. First, for MRC, improving trainings program has been kicked off by sending out evaluation survey to measure volunteer training interests and wants. We will use the result as a roadmap to improve our MRC training program. Two, I have been working to get an animal training up and running for MRC within C8. And the trainer who works through the SMART State of Massachusetts Animal Response Team is happy to come and speak to different groups as well. We will hold the first aid class for the community after the MRC training, which is in spring. I have been attending online and in-person courses hosted by FEMA and MEMA to furthering my emergency preparedness skills. Third, I had meeting with Tim and Tiffany last month, and I received feedback about changing wording and adjusting what written in the COVID action report phase 1 and phase 2. And the second step will be holding the tabletop meeting with the other departments to move forward with this project. Finally, for accreditation side, I continue working on collecting documentation checklist for domain 2 standard 2.2. Thank you. Any question?
Question? Okay, thank you, Tilly, very good.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll move on to shared services grants. As Diana can speak on that.
Diana is also an attendee online.
Okay.
Promote her to panelist.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, perfect. So January was a little bit of a lighter month. Roland and Jess had a few less inspections, which was fine. Roland was actually in Ghana for a school project, which was great. Big update is that Sherburne finally has submitted a letter of commitment to join our Public Health Excellence Grant. Going to be part. So
Dan, I think we might have lost you there. Can you repeat that?
health members should have received an invite for an interview. With our public health capacity. So if you haven't signed up for an interview, please do that.
Dana, could you mind repeating that? You cut out.
But if you have any questions, you can always contact.
We're getting more to the hours.
Diana, we might have to move on. You keep cutting out, so we might have to move on and try you again in a few minutes. Sorry about that.
If you want to do that.
Sure.
Okay.
If we move on, maybe Diana will get a better signal.
Oh wait, can you hear me better?
Yes, and now.
Okay, I think what happened is that it transferred to my headphone for some reason and I don't have my headphones on. But so Sherburne has signed a letter of commitment to join our Public Health Excellence group. The other big update is that most people should have received an invitation from Regina Villa Associates for an interview. The point of the interviews is to get a baseline of where everybody thinks we are in terms of public health capacity. So the interview questions, you'll get them sent to you ahead of time so you can review them. There's also an option to write in your answers. We just want everyone to speak openly. Your feedback will be kept anonymous. So yeah, if you haven't scheduled, the interviews are going until at least the first week of March. And if you guys have any other questions, you could always reach out to me or to Andrew or Reagan from Regina Villa.
Okay. I just want to make a comment. I already had my interview yesterday. After an aborted interview a week ago, we switched from Teams to Zoom. I hate Teams. It never worked. Zoom always works. And it went very well. And I think the questions were pretty much on target.
Glad to hear that.
I did mine as well.
That's great.
It's, hi, Diane, it's Kathleen. There were a lot of questions about other towns, and I realized I know absolutely nothing about what other towns do. So it's a lot of, I don't know.
But I think that helps open up the conversation too, so that we're all, because I feel like even when you ask the other towns, if you ask them about us, they might not necessarily know about our capacity either. So I think it's just a good warm up for everybody to get together, because from here we'll form a working group, and the working group will help us come up with our strategy to make sure that our public health excellence group is meeting the goals that we want, which is providing more or improving our capacity within the region.
So one of the things we will be looking for is for one or more members of the board to participate on a working group with probably a board member or two from the other communities, potentially a select board member. We've talked a little bit before. Needham is fortunate to have quite a lot of resources. We fulfill virtually all capabilities required of local public health departments. Some of our neighbors have less capacity, but this is an opportunity to sort of raise the level of public health services. For example, the board advocated for quite a long time for electronic inspections so that we'd have clear documentation so that restaurant owners would see violations clearly, that there'd be accompanying pictures, there'd be links. Not all communities have that. Not all communities have inspectors that are trained to the FDA food standards. That would be one sort of small way we could sort of standardize food inspections across multiple communities and ensure sort of a baseline capacity. And the hope is that if we do sort of an example of collaboration like that, there might be another opportunity to collaborate in another area of environmental health and in an area of public health nursing or infectious disease control, you know, and then sort of expand from there. We do want to understand what Needham is comfortable with in terms of sharing, because Needham honestly has the most capacity right now. And if you're asking me sort of the value case for why we're doing this, I think it's sort of a general good sense of trying to have public health as a whole be stronger. But right now, our best case is we want our neighbors to be able to swim more on their own so they wouldn't have to rely on us as much in an emergency. I think for them, it's a little bit of a question of how much interest you have in sharing services, how much of an interest you have in expanding services. If you can put in a little more money and you can get grant money to match and you can expand services, that's something you're willing as a community to do. So those are complicated questions, and it will take time to develop an intermunicipal agreement. But we're hopeful that we've started out on a good process.
I'm very hopeful about this process. Having served with the commission that started the whole thing.
Yes, it is. It's kind of your fault.
Any other comments about this? And I guess we would move to the accreditation team. Either Cindy one.
So Lynn is on vacation. Cindy is here virtually, and she will be joining in just a moment. Hey, Cindy.
Hello, hi everyone.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I'll just highlight a few things on behalf of Lynn and the steering committee and other staff involved in terms of accreditation activities. We are just about finalizing the senior assessment report, and we'll be able to share that soon. That is also informing the community health assessment as one portion of data. And so Julie has taken the lead on that, but we're starting to work on that and iron out the formatting, what data are included, and that will be coming together quite nicely relatively soon. We have met as a steering committee a few times, I think since our last report. We also if you recall, in the fall of last year, I presented information specific to Needham for a national public health workforce interest and needs survey, where the goal was to really understand the workforce needs in terms of training. And then it also asked various capacity and also work environment type questions. It was pretty comprehensive in terms of workforce interest and needs, as the title connotated. But the takeaway from that, if you remember, was that we scored, or the staff scored very positively, many different categories. And there were a few that were relatively lower in terms of the very high positive ratings. And so we wanted to do a deeper dive into some of those areas to get more information, more details, and more feedback. There is a requirement in the accreditation standards related to employee satisfaction. And so by doing this follow-up survey, we'll also be able to satisfy those requirements. So we did a follow-up survey of all the staff and found out some more details and great ideas, great feedback in areas related to rewards for creativity and innovation, how that gets fostered in the division, communication among leadership and staff ability to use technology, and a final category related to respect for employee backgrounds. And on the original survey, there was just one question related to these. So by doing the follow-up, we were able to ask further questions and have open-ended responses. So overall, the responses were very positive. We have great comments and ideas to follow up on. The steering committee, and specifically Tara, Tiffany, and Tim, are going to be following up on some of the ideas that have been generated, which include different opportunities for increased communication and information sharing among the division, facilitating more in-house trainings related to technology, and convening a work group to discuss ideas to further community building, inclusion and belonging, and highlight the division's array of cultures, interests, and backgrounds. So more to come on that, but that was something that was really positive to put together, and we'll be working more on the next steps with that. We've also been working to establish a contract related to getting some support for the brand strategy requirement with accreditation. This would be related to understanding the impression of the brand, quote unquote, brand of the public health division, as well as the visibility, the consistency, and we've put out an RFP to get some external support to help with that. And then finally, Lynn's been working on a broad array of policies, many of which have been in existence and are being updated and revised, and then looking at where there are gaps to develop new policies to put into place, some of which are internal policies and for operations, and some are more external facing.
Excellent. I'm glad this project is moving forward. It looks like it's quite successful so far. I'm really glad it is, and it does lend to improving the health department.
Thank you.
Comments? Yeah. Then I believe we're on to public health nursing and public update.
That's you.
Yep, that's me. So I'm Jenny, I'm the full-time public health nurse. This is my first time meeting you all, so thank you. So we did have a couple of cases of foodborne illnesses last month. We had a Campy case, salmonella, then we also had Legionnaires case as well that had COVID, presented to the ER with upper respiratory symptoms, no obvious source of infection. BP clinics at the Housing Authority have been going well. Matter balance classes have continued. The first class has just had their last class this week. COVID testing still continues for residents here. The demand wasn't too much until yesterday. I had 6 people scheduled, but otherwise testing has been pretty low. Hannah held 3 CPR classes, which leads me and 2 per diem nurses going to CPR instructor courses, so we can be signed off as instructors. Hannah and I also went to the Equity in Action for training, Matter of Balance meeting for Hannah. Yeah, she also did a lunch and learn at the CAF for DBAC. Right, and then last month there was a influenza sum of 19 confirmed cases and 6 suspected cases. We've done 2 self-help applications filled out. And that's basically some of it.
Questions and comments?
Just the Legionella, was that a resident of Edom?
Yes,
Okay. Do they, I mean, are they living in a home or in an institutional facility?
they live in their own home. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, just because obviously, the HVAC system is, prime suspect here, so I just want to make sure we're not having.
yeah,
There's no idea on the source.
no.
Only in the cooling tower. I mean, it doesn't spread the HVAC system at home, it comes at water, right? So it's in the shower. and so it's probably.
But it's
Yeah.
rooftop air, yeah, exactly, that's the classic, is, the pools and rooftop air conditioning, so that's why we're institutional, I'd be more worried.
Well,
Because I don't think the right spontaneously that easily, but no, that's sorry.
my
That's
name's been
why I'm
compromised,
wondering,
so it's
Mhm.
all levels in home.
Okay, thank you. So I guess we're up to the COVID-19 update. And epidemiology, Julie.
Yes, all right, so I don't have a lot to say on at the update, just wanted to emphasize things. Cindy mentioned I've been working a lot on the community health assessment, because this is a big crucial component to accreditation, and then leads to an improvement plan and a bunch of downstream things after that. Got a good draft going. We're trying to fix stuff in the accreditation steering committee meeting and figure out what data we think would be interesting to the town. And if you have any thoughts or suggestions, definitely feel free to let us know what you think people would be interested in. And if we're capable of getting that data, we can definitely include it. I also want to re-emphasize something Ginny said, which is that we are still doing COVID testing. So I'm taking over some of the scheduling responsibilities from Tiffany while she's out. The demand has definitely increased since the beginning of the year, which is not surprising, but I'm saying this just in case anybody happens to listen to this meeting and want a COVID test. Or if you hear of anyone who wants a COVID test, that we, are running these tests. It's a molecular level test and it's free, and it's a great thing that I think people may not realize we do. So just want to promote that. Okay, so quick comments on the COVID update. Not a ton to say here, but our daily cases are starting to decrease again. They hadn't increased too much, but the state cases have really started to increase. They're at the 70 average for the state is about 476 right now. Ours is about 3. The vaccinations, again, we discussed at the last meeting, this vaccination rates are always going to be a little off. For reasons I'm not sure. And I think last time we discussed maybe college students is why the 20 to 29 population is at 146% of one dose. But kind of ignoring that component, I would say we haven't seen a lot of movement. The percentages for first and second booster doses have remained pretty stagnant the last couple of months, especially in the sort of 50+ population. I would say there's been really no movement. We've seen a little bit of an increase in the 16 to 19-year-olds, 20 to 29-year-olds, and 30 to 49-year-olds in the especially second booster dose has gone up a couple percent, every meeting. But as a whole, I would say, we're not seeing a lot of demand for that right now. Hospitalization rates are starting to decrease again. The rates, have decreased since the last period, but they are still higher than they were a year ago, which I think is, interesting of note. The patient primarily hospitalized primarily due to COVID is still remaining about the same. It's been consistent at around 30% of hospitalization still. The 7-day average is 680 right now, hospitalizations. And then I just include a little screenshot from the influenza like illness dashboard, just because I think that's interesting. I think what sort of stuck out to me, because for a while we were lagging on the percent, this is for the state, not even, you know, we're at 44%, you know, vaccination rate, which I thought was sort of interesting. You can see kind of a distinct difference between the 2018 to 2019, 2019 to 2020 season, and I don't know if COVID sort of put that fear in people, but all of them have a slight sort of jump in vaccination rate. We'll see where we end this season. There's a little bit to go, but yeah, that's it. I mean,
Comments, anyone? Then we'll move on to substance abuse prevention. Carol.
Hi, how is everyone? I was going to share just a little bit about the quarterly community partners CCIT meeting we went to, and then ask Lydia to share a little bit about our work, because it was a great meeting at the police station today. Jenny was there, Karen, Lydia, the social workers. The good news is that BID Needham has a psychiatrist, they told us, and the 2 social workers that are 24/7, correct, through Riverside were there, that are supporting people with evaluation. And the other new thing that they shared was that they have Gosnell recovery coach in the ED, that they're doing a warm handoff for people to hear and learn about the options of going to detox or treatment. And that was new to me and new information. So the way we partner to support residents, acute and chronic, through the CCIT, I thought it was really positive to hear that. Riverside, of course, the other Riverside was there, and we joined the Office of Local and Regional Health Calls, and I just wanted to mention that they launched the behavioral health roadmap overview yesterday. I think a few of us were on that call. Tying into what we talked about at CCIT, we all pay, I think Susanna Hahn said $40,000 for interface today, Karen.
Yeah.
So project interface. So what was announced yesterday, and I'll pass this out, the 2-part component of the community behavioral health centers that are now opening across the Commonwealth, primarily for people that have mass health insurance, but they're an extended resource for people to get myriad services. And the other part of this is the helpline that came live January, I think it was 4th, that I can't wait to try, for people to call and get a resource for therapy, psych services, and other things. So it's the roadmap now they're making public. And again, you're probably familiar with the helpline that we got substance use treatment and homeless for many years. You could get detox, and they also had a sort for like I said, homeless or domestic violence resources. This has been set up to give behavioral health resources for people.
So
Now,
Carol, you said it's available for mass health.
that's the community. Why don't I do this? That's the behavioral health centers. There's 2 parts.
Are they available to patients who are uninsured?
You always ask the best question.
Well, the reason I ask is the public health emergency is slated to end in May. And at that point, people are going to be thrown off the Medicaid roll and off of mass health, and they'll have to reapply. And most of these folks don't have the wherewithal to even know how to apply.
I know this one.
So we're going to lose a lot of coverage. When we lose that coverage, it's very nice to set this up, but no one's going to get to access it unless they reapply and get mass health all over again. And that's going to take months.
Well, I'm going to ask about that. So you're saying, because I want to get it right, if people are off, which once
If
the
people lose
emergency's
mass
off,
health,
they
right,
automatically.
No, they might lose if they You know, a lot of people qualified under the relaxed guidance from the public health emergency. So once the public health emergency ends, people may lose mass health. I don't know in Massachusetts how many people may lose mass health, but those who do will have to reapply.
Yeah.
And that means they're going to have to go through an entire process. And I see people in the ED who are going through that process and can't get access to primary care, behavioral health services, or the like, until that insurance comes into effect, which literally can take weeks to months. So you set this up, but if I have somebody in crisis, this is useless unless they have the insurance, unless they take patients who are uninsured.
Yeah,
So that's why I'm asking.
that's a good question. My experience with getting people on mass health is quicker than that, so I certainly hope that's still the case. Through the connector and through a validation, so I haven't seen it take weeks and weeks, but I will ask, do you take uninsured people? I believe they said today in Massachusetts, 97% of the people who are on the call have insurance.
Yes.
But what you're saying is,
That they may lose it.
right,
This does not matter, though. This helpline, you can be uninsured. and
Right,
have, but
two
this
things.
one, I don't.
these community behavioral health centers is
Yeah.
what you're talking about.
Yes.
Yep. So I'll ask about that. One of the things I was just going to say is that they were candid. Riverside was candid and well, there are a few different Riverside segments there that said, you know, we need therapists, and the hospitals both said, we need techs, we need nurses. So I've heard Rep. Garlick talk about the millions that they've allocated for workforce development and tuition relief, and I appreciate that, but it's going to take a while. They also, we understand that we want to get therapists better reimbursements, so they start to take insurance, because I have friends who work professionally and don't. So it's
That's a whole another issue, right? And that's a longer term one that predates the pandemic and will go long after the pandemic. But for now, just as a department, I think we might want to assess how many people in Needham might be affected once the public health emergency ends, who are on mass health and might lose it, and what we're going to do to help them re-enroll if necessary.
Right. What we currently do is, we help them. We have Quincy Family Services, she was at the CCIT meeting today. She'll help people get on mass health, and the social workers. So we do have people, but I think your question is a good one. I don't know how we find that out, but we'll ask first about this, if they take uninsured people. And then we can talk about referring people to support to get back on mass health. Yeah, but we know and understand the billions, I say to Tim, of dollars, or however, I think it's one that has been committed to behavioral health. So the one leg is the helpline to get a therapist. Hopefully we can transition off interface, and the other part of these is the community behavioral health centers. So I feel like the effort is there. We also still have Riverside, and we depend on them 24/7 for mobile crisis for residents. So now let Lydia talk. Thanks for letting me share.
So I was here at the last meeting, but it might have been like my first week here, so I'll introduce myself again. I'm Lydia, I'm working with Carol and the Mass Health Grant. My position is as a substance use prevention coordinator. So right, everyone has share about that we did in January. We had a three-session webinar series called Equity in Action. It was an hour and a half for 3 consecutive Tuesdays with a different equity related theme. Each session we did it with a consultant from Rise Consultants, Nicole Augustine, and she is a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant. And the themes were, the first week we did foundational concepts about equity, and then the second week we talked about data, communicating data in an equitable way. And then the third week we talked about equity in people, and we had about 10 to 12 people attend per session, and it wasn't always the same folks, so we probably reached a little bit more than 10 to 12, and then it was through the 4 towns that our grant works with, so it wasn't just people from Needham, it was Needham, Dedham, Walpole, and Westwood. Public health staff, we invited police staff, we invited other organizations that we collaborate with. It was mostly public health department folks that showed up. And then we did have people reach out to us and ask if they could share videos with their coworkers who couldn't attend. And we recorded and posted the sessions onto our YouTube channel and made a playlist. And that was sent out to everyone who registered and all of our partners, which would be like the public health nurse for each town, the police chief of each town, the health director of each town, and everyone who registered to attend received the 3 recordings and 3 workbooks that went along with each session, so they could share those with their organizations and their network, and anyone can view them on our YouTube. Anything else you want to talk about there?
No, you did a great job.
Thank you very much. Guess we'll move on to substance use and prevention.
Good evening, everyone. Nice to see you all. Thank you to Carol and Lydia for hosting the Equity in Action. I was going to put that as one of my highlights for our COVID. We had several people from the COVID membership attend that, and I know that they really appreciated what they took away from that. So perhaps we'll be able to enjoy some future opportunities with Nicole Augustine around diversity, equity, and inclusion for the COVID. Other news in this span realm, we began posting throughout the community and at Needham High School and Pollard Middle School our positive community norms campaign posters. And next month I'll bring a couple of those to show you. But it's a culmination of almost a year long of work on developing positive community norms that really reduce the misperceptions around youth student use to the students themselves and to the broader community. Often students will think that everybody's drinking or everybody's using cannabis, some other substance, and what these norms, positive community norms messages do is really kind of dispel those myths, and hopefully over time, research has shown that social norms campaigns like this can shift people's expectations of their own behavior. So we're pleased to be able to provide those posters. We have 4 in the series, and we're dosing them out a month at a time to make it more of a continuum messaging. We're also working on planning a social coach education presentation for parents in the community in the early part of May, and we're partnering with Needham High School leadership and their PTC group. So we're very excited to be working with them on that. And from a stock grant perspective, I would like to mention that we purchased the 2023, this is a full one from last year, newsletter calendars that we hand deliver to all of our Needham alcohol licensees. It's a day-by-day calendar to determine the age of purchase for anyone coming in. And we found that people were very appreciative of them, and some businesses, in fact, had gone ahead and purchased their own. A couple of them had, but we will continue to buy these under the grant for as long as we're able to have another couple of years for that. And last month, I was fortunate to chaperone Erin Mullen, who is our salsa program coordinator, to take 10 salsa students out to Worcester to attend the 84 Movements Youth Power Summit, which was back in person for the first time I got years. So for anyone who's not familiar, the '84 movement is the Massachusetts anti-tobacco or tobacco prevention movement that's primarily youth-led. And the 84 represents the 84% of students who do not use tobacco. It's now, that was at the inception of the program. It's now up on well in the 90 percentile for students who do not use tobacco. So we're really proud of the fact that we had such a strong showing there at that summit. And then finally, on his comment, our prevention team is partnered with our neighbors at in Native for their coalition Native 180 on a year-long program called Project Echo, Cannabis Prevention in the Era of Legalization. It's a PTTC program that started a few years ago, and we applied to be part of that cohort, and we meet monthly. And last month we did our presentation. Every representative in the cohort is required to do a case study presentation. So we did ours together last month, and we talked mostly about the need for being able to shift perceptions around misperceptions around the impact of cannabis on the brain and how the teen brain in particular, and how we can try to shift more of the community norms, if you will, around the impacts on youth. So we're finding it a very educational opportunity, and we're hoping to be able to take some of the prevention initiatives that we're learning about back here to this community.
Excellent, thank you. Well, next question. Maybe for another time, Mr. Chair, but there are more data coming out now that cannabis is in larger use. There are more studies that are actually being done that are being able to demonstrate harm in youth where we didn't think there was going to be harm before. And it might be time to revisit some of that data and present it to town. I wouldn't want to do that necessarily with youth. I think marketing, in terms of behavior to youth, scare tactics don't work, obviously.
But as we begin to develop, messaging the town meeting, which may have questions, or the select board, which may have questions, particularly when it comes to, future licensing and regulation, keeping abreast of those, new developments, I think would be prudent.
I think, again, to also use the tobacco campaign as a model for that would be excellent.
Yes.
Look at the success we've had.
Absolutely
with
right.
tobacco.
The tobacco campaign works especially well, I think, by the influence of the Surgeons General, who really kind of, I think, shifted the public's perception around the harms of tobacco because of their messaging. And it would be great to be able to have a powerful influencer around cannabis use.
Some aspects of that would be very fun.
Yeah.
All right.
Excuse me,
Yes.
I made a mistake in what I said. Ginny found it on the Mass CBHC website, so do you want to read it? About the centers.
So the
Okay.
community behavioral health centers will take people regardless of insurance coverage.
Oh, good, excellent.
Right.
Okay. Perfect.
Right on here, for members of Mass Health and certain other insurers.
And then I went to the mass.gov website and it said there's 29 so far. Community behavioral health centers that will take uninsured.
Uninsured.
And yeah, regardless of insurance coverage.
Yeah. So. Thank you, I appreciate that.
Perfect. Okay.
And this one's in Norwood, the closest.
Okay. All right, we have environmental health. Claire, you want to do that?
As you can see, Alice is not with us. She has taken a great opportunity at Harvard University to be their food and pool inspector. So it's bittersweet. Yes, she has. So again, it's a great opportunity for her. So we're really proud of her. I mean, that Harvard wanted her from Needham,
That's something that.
correct. So yes, it's bittersweet. So I'm taking on again Ali's role, getting some help from shared inspectors as well. Diane has been great in helping provide some services from the shared inspectors in Ali's absence. So we, for this past month, we've been busy. Ally was able to help me get out the food enforcement policy. We emailed it to all the permitted food establishments in town. We've also did hard copy mailings of this policy. And we're actually having our inspectors also hand deliver it as they do their inspections, so they can answer any questions that people may have. A lot of the questions I'm getting back are about the fines and when they get initiated. And one restaurant in particular was like, well, am I going to worry about this? I said, if you're still seeing a priority of party foundation violation on your third inspection, you know, that's the only time when we're gonna actually issue a fine. And so most of these establishments in town should not be affected by that, so that's great to know, but there are a few out there that we just have to make sure we have that message clear, you know, because they won't just get hit with the re-inspection fee, but they also get the $50 fine for these priority and party foundation violations. So we're gonna be, again, looking to do some trainings as well coming up. I think just Kent Money Sheriff Inspectors expressed interest in helping us do that. So we'll be setting that up hopefully in the coming weeks. We'll have to plan that out. So that's going well. And the other thing we've been working on are just policy reviews with Lynn, again, trying to get those policies that just haven't been written up yet for the Roma Health team, just getting those documented for the accreditation process. We talked about the compliance for tobacco. The only other one I wanted to bring up is we're dealing with a real tricky housing concern on High Street. You may have seen that the initial concern last month about some trash barrels that weren't provided by the landlord, which we're able to work with the landlord. They provided the trash barrels, that was signed off. We had 2 other instances of the same property in reference to lack of heat in a unit, which we worked with coordinating that. Been a very long process, and then recently we had a housing complete inspection. We did inspections over there as well, wrote up some violations, have been trying to coordinate, but it's a very tricky one because the owner and landlord do not get along. So we're kind of in the middle and being intermediary, but it's hit a lot of departments and hours spent on getting this done. And I've worked with the building commissioner and the police, and we've done some inspections. We did a follow-up today, which went pretty well. So we have some updates. We'll just keep trying to coordinate those items to be completed in a timely manner. So that would be something we'll be looking at.
And it's a challenging time, especially with Ally having departed. But it does potentially bring up the question of whether proactive housing inspection before rental would be something the town would want to consider. It would be a significant undertaking. It would be a very significant departure from how we've historically operated. But it might avoid complicated situations like this by catching sort of situations before they actually occur.
We require to have some kind of an occupancy permit.
Pre-occupancy. Right, so it'd be a pre-occupancy housing inspection.
How many rental units do we have in the town?
I don't know off the top of my head. I'd have to research
I know
that.
it's been growing.
In the order of hundreds?
A huge number, I think.
And how many units do we have problems with?
Dozens, but low dozens, 3 dozen.
So less than 10%?
Yes, definitely. I don't know if it's the best idea.
I'll let
It's
you do the
one
math.
Yes,
Well, but are there certain types like multiple units versus single? I don't know, you know, which ones
the
might be higher
majority of our
risk.
complaints are generated by, the majority of our most complicated complaints are generated by smaller units rather than large apartment buildings.
Right, I mean, you'd have to piece that out and very carefully, all sorts of equity issues on which ones you're gonna inspect and which ones you aren't.
Right, which is why I think if we did it, we'd have to do it universally. I do think that housing and hoarding cases are growing and growing more complex, and they take best case scenario dozens of person hours. If you're talking about this case right now, it hasn't quite hit 1,000 person hours, but it's many hundreds of person hours from public health, building, police.
Is there any, if you are going to be a landlord, is there any required training, anything that, you know, like about what they have to provide and how
I mean,
that
the
goes?
state offers training, obviously, on their website. We have training for guidelines, I guess you could say, for landlords and tenants. There's lots of information out there online through the state community sanitation program. As far as their, like, I don't know if there's an actual training, like, if you're talking about like a.
Well, there's certainly no
At
requirement.
what point do you say somebody can't lease it, right? So for instance, in this case, you have the landlord, I mean, from your report, said they had to install a new oil tank. That suggests that there was a real problem with the heating system to begin with. Why was it let to get in such disrepair when they're trying to?
There was actually like a leak that was found, and I think it was some disconnect on a contract that ran out, and then when the occupant went to look into filling the tank, the company came in and saw that there was a little weak, so then they wouldn't fill it.
Of course.
So then there was an issue with the
This
tank.
is an indoor.
Correct, right. So it's a little, just the coordination piece was the tricky part. Because the landlord.
Yeah, you didn't get it to us.
Obviously, if we ever consider doing that pre-occupancy housing inspections, it would be after months of discussion with the board, after making sure we have the resources, but I do think it's something interesting to consider. Because we do have very complicated cases like these that are the exception, but are growing.
Are there other towns that have pre-occupancy permits?
Yes,
Maybe we should examine some of their records and.
they're
some of their
generally more,
experiences.
yep, I think that's a great idea. They're generally more urban. They generally have a larger percentage of housing stock that is rentals as opposed to single family home ownership.
Like it or not, needed with urban item.
Well, we issue occupancy permits, right?
The building, yeah.
But I wonder also, do we know that a pre-occupancy inspection would prevent some of these things that, if someone's in there reporting, you wouldn't know that until they're in. So, how much will it really prevent some of these complicated cases would just be worth thinking about.
Yeah, that's the question, because usually they don't show us, like, we do some here and there right now for, low income housing, like we've getting a couple of those, but they show us in the apartment spotless.
Right.
So we come in and we're like, I don't think we've written up anything so far that we've done, a few that we've done. So it might incentivize the landlord to make sure their place is completely, pristine before the house comes in to check. So it might be an incentive.
Yeah, I mean, what might be a better system would be random spot checks. I mean, you have a list of all the housing stock and you just put, you put in a reg and basically says at random, we reserve the right to do something and you literally make it random, right? So
You can do that, but if it's,
Yeah.
you'd have to be invited in if somebody's willing.
if there's not a problem, then there's not gonna be a problem. If there's a problem, someone's gonna fight you.
I got one question, I didn't see Linden Street there. How's that?
So that one, there was no updates. There was a court hearing scheduled after the building department did that, it's been condemned. That letter was taken to the housing court. So I think that was scheduled for this month. The actual court date. So that was why nothing was put in there on that, but
And
that's
then
still.
I see there was something in Seabed's way, which just leads me to say that we need to support the Needham Housing Authority in their
Yes.
plans to upgrade and renovate significant pieces of their parking lot.
So, Mr. Chair, I believe we've finished the monthly report. It's just a couple minutes past 7
Right.
o'clock.
Yeah,
If
we'll
you-
let this run, it's really not that long.
Yeah, if you'd like to officially open the hearing on the biolabs, I believe Kathleen has a statement that she wants to make as soon as you technically open the hearing.
Yes, okay, I will open the hearing on the biosafety regulations.
So I am going to recuse myself from any more review of biosafety regulations. I learned about 2 weeks ago that the consultant who submitted comments was from my company as a subcontractor for both ends on the Muzzy Ford development. I had no idea. And there's been no conflict. We don't work together. I don't know anything about the work that's done. But it's probably easiest, simplest if I don't participate. So I'll disappear for the next few meetings when this stuff's coming up. So that's right. All right.
Okay, so we'll start the hearings. And I believe we have some people.
Yes.
Audience, which maybe would make statements.
So, Mr. Chair, we received one set of public comments, which is included in your packet.
Yes.
We have not received any other public comments, but the floor is open if you wish to call on people to make a statement. And then the board can discuss any statements they hear, as well as the statement we received in writing.
Yeah, I think let's take the statements from the people who are here.
Great.
And then we'll deal with the letter. From, Environmental health and engineering. And so, are the people registered? Or should I just
Anyone who does wish
actually
to
come from the front table?
sit next to Tara, one at a time, if you would.
Whoever wants to come first. Yes, sir. Okay. State your name.
I'm Stephen Brecker, and I'm just the guy who's lived here for 32 years
Um,
and got a call.
Sorry, one point, the town's practice is to state your name and your address, if that's okay.
Okay, so Stephen Brecker, 54 Border Road,
Thanks very
Needham,
much.
Mass. And I don't do anything microbiological. I got a call from a friend in Natick, doc that I work with at the VA hospital. He was in a high-rise building or a fancy building in the Natick Mall, and they were building a lab next door. And he called me about the laws in Natick that I think they were about 40 years old, or they didn't have any. And I happened to see in the paper, I've never been to a town meeting about this hearing, so I decided I'd like to hear what we have to do, because I've worked, I'm a retired microbiologist. I just retired after 39 years in the VA, and so know about biohazards and different levels and want Needham to do it right. And I think I read they sent me the 93 bylaws. I read them, they look pretty good. And it's just like with a new lab, maybe in the Muzzy space, that I think we want to encourage business, but we want to make sure that it's perfectly safe to the town. So that's why I shut up.
I think you said exactly what we were thinking, when we decided to revise the old regulations.
They've had a lot of molecular biology come down.
Well, yeah, whole recombinant DNA and everything else is all research. So that's why we needed to deal with these regulations. And the NIH is continue to refine these. I think it would be excellent if we can come up with modern regulations. I appreciate your comments. Thank you. And the others will continue to take comments from people. Yes, you can.
I'm Betsy Yeoman, and
Could you take that chair? Let's be a table.
Hi, everyone. I'm Betsy Gilman Duane, and I'm a resident of 67 Farwell Street in Natick. I'm here representing environmental health and engineering in Newton, Massachusetts.
Okay.
So I submitted written comments, which I believe you all have, trying to provide some helpful and practical information. I commend you for aligning with many of the local regulations that have had successful runs, Cambridge, Boston, Lexington. So your regulation as proposed looks a lot like those. I did want to call your attention to one item, which I believe is really not as practical as maybe it was intended to be, and also potentially could drive business away from Needham. And that is the requirement in section 1151, where a developer would need to obtain a permit or registration before constructing a building or renovating an existing building into life science labs. I believe that that's not practical, in that when there's a tenant that has not yet been identified, a developer, for example, or a landlord would not know what exactly the materials would be that the tenant or tenants would be working with. So it would be very, very unlikely that they could provide enough information so that, you know, you would know and understand what they'd want to work with. I'm happy to take any questions on any of my comments.
Eric, you want to respond? Or anybody else?
So I think Julie has been the lead for most of the edits. And I think one of the things that we're hoping to do is to incorporate some of this feedback based on the board's comments and discussion. We did also get, and it was earlier today, otherwise it would have been in your packet, feedback from town council on what records could be redacted or held back from a freedom of information request if they were part of a laboratory's submission to the town. There's some categories of records that can be held back, and there's some categories that cannot be held back. So we got clarification on those sections, which would be helpful.
So my only question to you, I mean, first of all, I thought your comments were excellent and, you know, we'll obviously give them due consideration, but do you have any conflicts of interest that you would identify?
I'm sorry.
Any conflicts of interest? I mean, you said you're representing a firm that's not in our town and you don't live in our town.
Yes, so
Are there any conflicts of interest?
so my client is the Bullfinch Companies, which is developing the Muzzy Board property. And environmental health and engineering has been retained to assist them with that project and other projects as well.
Excellent. I just want my interpretation of 11.5.1 is that we just wanted to know, oh, are you going to have a biology biotech lab in your space? Not exactly went back down to every detail of it's going to happen. But is it going to be a microbiology lab? Is it going to be a molecular biology lab? You know, not what kind of molecular biology is what you're going to do, but fact, just so we know what's coming, and then we can move from there. But by registering, it was just tell us you want to lab space over in the old Muslim. Sorry, but not sorry.
Sure, so sort of a notification versus an actual filing for a permit with the health department.
Yeah, that's where I see it.
Okay.
But I may be wrong.
Yeah, I mean, we register them now, right, like, so when a biotech comes, we have an online application that they fill out and they give us some information on it. So, I mean, if that's something that we want to maintain, I mean, we want to be aware of what's in town. I think other ones, the tenant has signed on. All right, so that one was a company. Yeah.
I think we are on the same page of it.
For example, I can see a developer saying, yeah, I'm gonna put in lab space here, I don't really want to take it now. And I don't know exactly what they're gonna do, so I could tell you it's a DL1 or DL2. Sort of, you know, when I'm dealing with three, that's unlikely to happen.
Well, that was my question. As 3 and 4 off the board, we're at 1 or 2, which is good.
That's basically not gonna happen.
Yeah, we said four will not happen. 3, there will have to be a community discussion.
It's only before 3s on these posts, correct?
Yeah, 3s are really few and far between. They're expensive to develop, build, and operate. And they're really just for a very selected number of pathogens that typically you would see in a more academic environment rather than in a life science company.
Right, but the question, you know, we have a lot of academic environment around here, right? So Mass General Brigham, B.I. Leahy says, you know, something we have this space in Needham, it's a little less expensive than what we have in Boston. We'd like to open a lab, you know, here in Needham. That's why we want to be able to at least address that.
Yeah, and we don't want to scare business away either.
Yeah.
But it's got to be safe.
Yeah.
And I do think I read your letter, and I do think that, you know, many of your comments are really, you know, right on target. So we'll definitely have to consider all of these members. Look at revising the letters. Whereas. Before we have to find it.
Mr. Chair, as a reminder, we anticipated that this would be at least a 2-month process with opening the hearing this month, soliciting feedback, which the only one we received was your feedback. No one else actually submitted anything, but holding it open and either voting at a March meeting or potentially an April meeting. After we incorporate additional feedback received from town council, from others, any discussions the board had, we would submit a revised version of the regulation for the board to consider at the hearing next month. And then depending on the board's comfort level, it could choose to vote on the regulation that month, or it could choose to say, close the hearing and we'll vote in April.
My personal opinion would be to close the hearing in March, do all the final revisions, and then consider the final product in April. That's my opinion. I don't.
So we'll keep it open until March.
Yeah, so that's fine. It's not like we'll let you know tomorrow morning. Any other comments?
Well, and I was just gonna say, and we're gonna be building our Needham committee, and so expertise like yours and others in town, I think will be helpful as we.
Want to keep hearing?
Well, I just retired. I'm looking for stuff to do.
I've always loved this stuff.
Yeah.
You may regret saying that.
Yeah.
Any other?
Big fan of Florida.
Okay. Well, there's always some excitement.
It's a great town and we want to keep it that way. That's all.
Exactly.
And it'd be nice to bring in that industry, but as I said, the guy from Natick, when he was a very well-known doc in Boston, he said, they're gonna have this coming 10 feet from the house and this event is gonna be here. And I gave him the name of a couple of consultants in that field, but it really sounded like Natick hadn't done anything for a very long time. I know I lived there before Needham and I was on the committee to fluoridate the water. They were a little behind. So,
Okay.
we'll do it right for a while.
So Jim, what do we do now? We have.
So, Mr. Chair, I think what you would do is you would choose to leave this hearing open. We would continue to accept comments online. If someone wishes to send a postal letter, that would be nice too. And we would take feedback for you for your next meeting. So you won't actually close the hearing, you'll just move on to the next agenda item and then keep the hearing open.
At the 20th, you'll move to close the meeting, the hearing today.
Right, we'll keep the hearing open until the next month's meeting. Yep.
Okay, that's good. Very good.
Okay.
So we have another little hot ticket item. Move on to the alcohol compliance challenges and licensee education.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll give you my cards.
Oh, yeah.
I do have the best card in America.
Let me know where you guys are.
When I retired, they gave it to me.
Oh, okay.
But I'm the chief of staff and that's a staff thing.
Yeah.
Thank you for giving me the chance to say a few words. You guys are doing a great job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Get rid of it.
Mr. Chair, with your permission, I will reach out to, so we posted in newspapers, we posted on the town website, we posted on the town calendar. We had gotten in the fall 1 or 2 emails about this, and I was kind of surprised that the people who emailed had not chosen to submit comments. So with your permission, I will reach out to them and send them a revised draft and say, would you like to submit comments? Would you like to come to the board's next meeting? Just to sort of, and those emails had been from neighbors of the proposed development who had expressed concerns. And so I think we want to make sure that if they wish to say something, their voices are heard.
Very good. Keep it as open as possible. So I guess we'll move on to alcohol compliance and licensing education.
We are for another discussion. I want to first of all thank Julie because she was instrumental in helping me compile some data and create some data visualizations. Thank you, Julie. Tonight, I share with you a few changes to the alcohol compliance summary chart that was in last month's. We have added some historical information from 2017 to 2019. Thank you to Carol Reed for providing that to me, but we have included that in the summary sheet for your reference. We had several tips, trainings that were conducted during that time period, as well as several compliance checks, and it is on the second page of that summary that we added some totals at the bottom, so you can see, for example, how many people attended tips and how many sales to minor violations occurred. On the next slide, we took a little bit of that data in terms of the number of sales violations and put them in a historical list here so that you can see, for example, the fluctuation in the percent of sales to minor violations over time. And we can compare that to the number of businesses checked.
Didn't fluctuate a lot.
Yes. And I think this tells us that going forward, we will be obviously continuing to collect all of this information, but you know, looking back historically, it's a little hard to tell exactly what's going on. You want to add any comments to it?
Yeah, just that in going through the data and the previous compliance check reports and even, you know, the scheduling of the tip training and all of that, there were a lot of differences in the way the process had been in these early compliance checks versus how the process happens now. And, you know, Karen and Carol and their teams have really solidified this process and made sure that we're being consistent in the way that it's done, and also in their efforts to report as much data as possible. So I think it's tough, you know, you're saying there, I think that we observe that as well. There's a lot of inconsistencies, it sort of fluctuates. I think a lot of that just has to do with those differences historically and how things had been done. So I think the thing we're aiming for is that now that the process has sort of been ironed out and we understand what kind of data we want to collect, the data will be better going forward because the process is the same. You know, Karen has a lot of control over what's collected, how it's done, you know, what operatives are recruited and all of that.
Are we tracking also the issue of whether it was a manager trained versus a staff person? Because I know that was something that was an issue or question that came up, that maybe no managers have been trained or things like that.
Yes, in fact, a lot of that too goes through to the town manager's tracking process, because ultimately they're the ones that control the regulation and therefore have to impose the requirement on management and bartenders attending the training in person every 2 years. But yes, we have that information here and it's trackable for sure. The next slide shows a little bit of profiling on the underage operatives that we use and have used. Typically, we have 2 underage operatives. In the last year, we've been recruiting them through our local college, Bowling College. They are generally always 19 to 20 years of age. We've had both students who are in-state, Massachusetts in-state, as well as out-of-state. At least I can vouch for that for the 21, 22. And what has remained consistent, the very first compliance check that was done back in 2017, is that they present their own identification when proof of age is requested. So again, as Julie was saying, we're going to start tracking a lot more of this detail so that at least we will have consistent information to follow on to help us if we need that. The next slide refers to the number of people we trained last year in the training and intervention procedures for surfers. That's our TIPS training. This was something I had verbalized at our meeting last month and just wanted to solidify that. So in 2022, we had 48 NEA alcohol licensee staff attend the in-person training. And overall, the people who attended TIPS were not the people who committed a sales to minor violation through the compliance checks, with the exception of one person who we identified.
Do we know how many of those 48 actually were present when you went to do an inspection? I mean, because I know it's like random, right, when you go,
Right,
so.
that's the inverse of this. For the people, for the businesses which passed the inspection, we don't ask their name. The operatives don't ask their name, so we wouldn't necessarily know that.
But it might be useful to ask that in the future, possibly.
I think we could definitely figure out how to do that. One of the sensitive aspects that our chief of police and I have discussed is that, when an operative goes in and the business is successful in the compliance check, meaning that they pass the check, our operative just walks out. So in theory, that staff person has no idea, in theory, right, that that check has happened. And I think there have been occasions in the past where if a business knows a check, they've just been checked, they may potentially want to contact other businesses to let them know. I'm not saying for sure that I know that has happened, but I think one aspect about collecting that name could be putting that operation at risk. So that's something to consider. And I don't know if there's another way to, off the top of my head, to obtain that employee's name without, in the moment at least.
Unless they have a name tag visible, but that's pretty rare anyways, right?
So it's really hard to justify that second point then, because you don't know that overall those who tips don't sell. We know that we've only identified one.
Right.
That we know.
Yes.
Yeah, but overall, we have no idea because we don't know what the denominator is. There's no way to know.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So I might just take the asterisk thing and put that actually into your bubble in lieu of what you have there now. Right. I mean, I think it's still very powerful to say, only one person who's attended tips has ever been caught selling.
Thank you. We have a little bit of data on the tips training survey that all of the folks who attend our in-person training are asked to complete. It's an official survey through the tips organization. And two questions in particular that we wanted to just share with you. One question is, do you believe that alcohol server training should be required by law? And we have found that consistently over time, those 2022 trainings, but Carol has mentioned this as well in her experience, that the vast majority of the attendees will respond yes, that they do think that it should be required by law. It's a testament to the training. And I also found the question about at your organization, the biggest alcohol related concern is. And we provide that there with the potential responses between over-serving, unruly behavior by patrons, intoxicating use, and underage drinking. You'll see here, 64% of the folks who attended the 2022 trainings indicated that underage drinking was their primary concern. But important to note that TIPS provides training on other aspects of these different scenarios between over-serving and unruly behavior and intoxication.
Yes, during that question, like anything about liability related to that?
Just the survey.
Yeah, yes, and they're concerned about what liability they might have for certain.
I'll go back and check. There may have been a question with regard to that, but I'll never say that. It's like a 20-question survey, so. Check it out. Yes, the official survey.
Yeah, I think that the next slide, or sort of already touched upon those points, but as we were trying to put this together, we just found it was tough to piecemeal what we had from 2017 and 2018 to what we have currently. And I think in some instances, it's not totally fair. I think the comparisons, because the process has changed so much and because the restaurant landscape has changed so much with COVID, But, you know, our hope is, these conversations is just that we learn more about the process and that we're gonna sort of over collect data just so we have in the future. So we have a big database now that collects information on, you know, these tip survey questions, information on the tips attendees, when they attended, what their names were, what their roles were. For the compliance checks, the, you know, day of the week and the month and the, you know, time of the check, because that might make a difference, you know, in why certain failures, you know, numbers of failures are happening. The name and the role of the person who served or sold to an underage operative, information about the sex and the age of the operative, you know, anything that we might be able to glean information from about why failures are happening. And even how we can support the business. Yes.
And what about the October 2019 student? Did they look exceptionally young? Because right, it's various as well. You know, it just so happened. Another thing is that have you thought about? I mean, I know that teenagers are getting Uber deliveries of alcohol. We just seen in 21. I know the person who ordered, but there are most of these drivers are not checking. I don't know how we would do that, but it is something that I don't think I think some purchase by teenagers at Needham High maybe happen in the liquor stores. I don't think it's that they're getting it from siblings. I think they're getting it from stealing from their parents. And then apparently this is an avenue as well that another complication in what we do.
I think in the tips, there's another questionnaire of sorts that asks, does your business to the attendees, does your business deliver? What does it deliver? Of course, that doesn't give us enough of that information, right? But I guess we find there are enough businesses that say yes, and like worth asking.
Yeah. Or even once they test it and say, you know, sure.
Before COVID, Needham, when the liquor stores opened, we realized that they deliver. And one of the things we talked about was how Tara checks the retailers' records. If we could put in the regulation that we go into the liquor store and see what their delivery records show, noting they have an ID and checked an ID for delivery. So that would be something that we talked about before, and something that Needham's done with tobacco as far as retailer accountability. The second part is we know that stores from Newton and Dover deliver. They have for years. I started here in 2008. So working maybe even with shared services and, through the Mass Code 3 grant, that's how we started these regional compliance checks. So I feel like that's a policy thing that could be something we could advocate for. And as far as the Uber, some of us belong to this group. It's evenings once a month, Massachusetts Alcohol Policy Coalition. And one of the women that had my job now works for the CDC. They're working with US Alcohol Policy Alliance, and they did that survey asking people to order and see how many people with kids, it would say be someone like many of us here. And they have some data locally on how little of the food delivery people asked for an ID. So, we know that when we wrote the SAPSI grant, we fashioned it after tobacco. So those kind of policy changes could be significant as far as just retail accountability. But yeah, that's it. At least that's it.
Thank you.
Thank you guys.
Rob, I just wanted to interject. We have the official tips survey questions that Julie has loaded into our tracking here. And one of the questions asks, is personal liability related to alcohol sales a major concern for the county? So we do have that information, and
But it looks like it's probably not a major concern.
right.
We're not saying anything.
With various, I think overall 63% of them. Said yes. Right. So thank you for your patience. I want to just end with a summary that we researched and put together, thanks to Monica on our team. That compares the defined penalties to a number of other communities in our area, so to speak. And we just thought it would be helpful information to have. And I'll let you choose what you'd like to take away from that. But what is interesting to note from our perspective is that there's clearly a range of penalties that varies across the communities, but going from warnings to suspensions that vary from as little as 1 day up to 1 year. And then license revocation. And in one town, in fact, roll has a rollback in hours of operation. So
We find out what the actual penalties have been. These are nice guidelines, like for instance, we've had a number of violations in Needham. I'd like to know under the guidance, like there was one institution on the third offense. They actually did not have a suspension, they had, something else, or if they did, it was always at the lower end. Be useful to make that information.
So if I understand your question, you're curious to know what the other towns have needed.
No.
What we've done
Needham
here.
looks like historically, yes.
Yes, we have to
Is that-
get that from the town manager.
Selectmen.
Yes.
My understanding is that, because I talked to Marianne Cooley about this, is every restaurant that failed, they got a visit from members of the select board to talk about it and talk about what they needed to do and all that. So I didn't know the select board was
They
doing
visited
it.
the establishment.
That's what she told me.
They called them in.
Or, okay, it might have been, they met with them. I don't know where, but they met with everyone that failed.
They were all given a written warning, as I recall.
Yeah.
Yes, I've been invited to them in the past. They have the police chief, the town manager and the select board, and they call in each manager or owner and sort of say, explain yourself. But to
I'm
your
not
point,
aware of anything that's been beyond a 1 day suspension, ever. And that 1 day suspension is usually like a Wednesday meeting.
In all these towns that you looked at, are the regulations and the penalties all under the jurisdiction of the select board of those towns, or any that's under the protocol?
That's an excellent question. I'm not sure. We can go back and try to assess that out. We included on the last slide the link to the alcohol regulations. So we could make a little summary of that.
My question, I guess now, if we were to go from here. We want to have a discussion with this, someone from the select board.
so Tejal did have a conversation with the select board chair, Marianne Cooley. The select board is opening up their alcohol regulations. They're going to do that on February 28th. They're going to officially open them up for comment by this board and for comment by myself, the police chief. They will take those comments and feedback and then open them for public comment on the 14th of March. And they intend to vote on a major overhaul of their regs on March 28th. I know that, and I haven't seen all of the details yet, but I do know that it will require every establishment to purchase an ID scanner. It will mandate reporting of tips trainings for all new hires within 6 months. There will be updated language about training. Again, I haven't seen it, I've just seen the summary. I do know that they're going to, as I said, ask the Board of Health for its feedback and ask myself and the police chief for our feedback. It does prompt a question because the board is now meeting and our next meeting is not till mid-March after they're looking for your comments before then. Whether this board wants to meet either in person or over Zoom once the regulations are released to discuss them and to sort of have a feedback session so that we can give sort of one coherent response to what the select board has proposed.
I think we could, maybe, could we meet by Zoom?
Okay, yes.
The law still in effect. before, and try and come up with a coordinated response.
I
I
think
mean,
it's a-
basically, I think, my opinion is the selectmen have been ineffectual in dealing with this issue because their penalties have been too minor. Minimal.
Either that or they haven't been enforcing them, which is why I'm asking for that data.
But I do think we could give some strong recommendations on modification, but then the enforcement piece is key. Now, Marianne said she's more than happy to come to a meeting and discuss with us. But, you know, to Tim's point, that would be after we submit comments. So we can think about like what the timing of that is, or is it after they vote and approve, then we ask them to come and talk about how they're gonna enforce or something like that, you know, but she's more than willing to come.
I think the question remains whether or not we just take it over from them under chapter 111. And I think that still needs to be on the table.
I think that's the club over their head.
That is certainly a complicated issue, though.
And so
So
we have the staff to be able to deal with this.
right, we also don't know what they're proposing. I do think they're proposing some pretty significant changes, although we need to see them in writing. And to your point, Steve, are they gonna then follow up? Is it going to be may or is it gonna be shall? Are they gonna impose the penalties each time, or are they going to equivocate?
Right, and are they gonna actually, you know, do compliance checks or not? I mean, so far we're doing that, and what happens with it? Is the select board paying for that, or are we paying for that?
Right now, we pay for our staff time and police pays for their staff time.
And what's the result of all of that? Just that we're collecting data.
Oh, yeah.
It goes nowhere. That's my point, you know, so I mean, I think one of the things is they should budget for this. We have the service, we can certainly do it, but we should be getting money from their budget to do this. If they want to do it, unless they're going to, you know, unless they want to set up their own system for checking, for doing compliance checks. And I don't think they have the wherewithal to do it.
Okay.
Right? I mean, why are we paying for this if we don't have the jurisdiction over it?
I think in part, we want to make sure that's done.
I understand that, but I think the two, you know, there needs to be an argument that those two need to go hand in hand.
Mhm.
You know, if you want us to be doing that, then, you know, we'll do the compliance checks and the enforcement. If you want to be doing that, then you should be funding it. We're happy to do it for you, but, you know, there's a price to that. I mean, we're using our staff time to do all of this.
I mean, I think our track record with tobacco is rather impressive, so.
Yeah.
Translate that to alcohol.
So I guess for next steps, when I do get those regulations, I'll send them to the board. In the meantime, I'll try to schedule a meeting for the first week of March over Zoom. Maybe a 60-minute meeting with sort of no other topics on the agenda. Depending on sort of the outcome of that, would you want to then potentially ask either Marianne Cooley as the chair, or Marianne Cooley and Marcus Nelson as the chair and vice chair to attend the board's March or April meetings? Or
I think, yes, we should invite them to. Maybe March meeting.
okay,
And it should be both of them because, well, Marion is probably gonna get reelected, just never know.
We just did a quick, Julie just did a quick look at all of the other towns on that comparison chart. And to your question, there were no boards of health overseeing the alcohol licenses. Select board, boards license commission. But no board of health.
one of the few I'm aware of is Newton, where they don't have a board of health, they have a commissioner of health and human services, and the power is vested in the commissioner, so it'd be my equivalent. Who does licensing. But I don't know of any board of health that does alcohol licensing.
All right, it's now 7:45, so I think we should take a vote to close the public hearing on biosafety regulation.
Sure, so technically, I think we'll keep it open. And we'll resume it next month. So we'll hold the hearing open, you'll continue to accept public comments. And we'll resume it next month.
Okay, so do we need
No, as chair, you can just say I will hold the hearing open. Yeah,
And
the
we'll keep the
gavel.
meeting open until next month.
Yep.
And accept comments until that time.
Excellent.
So,
We did include in the Board of Health's packet, usually it's between January and March each year, we ask, or I ask the board to officially sort of vote on two things. One is the designation of the Board of Health agents. Ed knows this from his role with the National Association of Health Boards. Boards of health are agents in the state. They are empowered to designate agents to enforce their will and to discharge their statutory obligations. The board has the wherewithal to revoke that at any time. We ask once a year for the board to actively state and clarify who its agents are. This is more of a formality, but if there's ever a question in legal proceedings, or if there's ever a question about enforcement powers, we can go pretty clearly to a notice public meeting where a vote was taken and the board designated this power to Mr. McDonald and Ms. Gurge and Ms. Light. The other item is something we've done for a couple of years now, tracing back to originally some controversies around marijuana legalization. There are times when talking about the health impact of policy decisions can be very political. The role of professional staff in the public health division is not to be political. We're not supposed to say, vote yes on question 3, or, you know, re-elect McDonald to whatever position. We are supposed to say that, you know, allowing secondhand smoke will have significant health effects, that reducing the alcohol age would have the following impacts, and we know that, you know, it's an addictive substance. So sometimes that can be a thorny issue, and we ask sort of for a paper shield, I think, for lack of a better word, that the board puts down. It wants its health division to always pursue the best science, to advocate for the health impacts of everything. Again, it's a little bit of a paper shield, but it's a shield if someone says you're politicizing something.
okay, well, shall we deal with the letters first?
Yeah, so those are the two letters. They are draft, as you see. You would choose, if you wish, to vote, and the suggested motion is in the agenda fact sheet on page 98 of the packet.
Oh, so you need one of us to do this motion? I'm happy to do it. I move the Board of Health support the agent designation as outlined in the presented letter, sign such letter, and ask that the letter be filed with the town clerk.
Second.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries.
And then there's a second one. I move that the Board of Health charge Needham Public Health Division to educate and inform the community about the public health impact of policies and programs. I propose that we make the charge as outlined in the presented letter, sign such letter, and ask that the letter be filed with the town clerk.
Second. All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, carried.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Three of the board members were at town hall last night for the meeting about Claxton Fields. I will let you all sort of say what you thought. I would say that the Department of Environmental Protection has pushed back on the town's plans sort of at every step of the way, and saying we want more testing, we want additional testing, we want additional information. The town has, you know, complied at every step of the process. The borings were actually done today. And it will take a couple weeks to get some of the results back. It will take almost a month to get some of the other results back. I was surprised, I guess, that no one last night had any health related questions whatsoever. The questions were all about when's batting practice and when can we sign up, and if you move us from this field, we want that field instead of this group because this has parking. There's some good things because right now we don't know what potential environmental contamination is. There is no point in speculating, but the 60 or so people that came last night didn't seem particularly concerned about that at all. We do think that there are sort of 4 scenarios. One is that we look and there is nothing found in the 12 inches of topsoil, and even below that, we think that's pretty unlikely, but that's a possibility, I guess. There's the GIF of the Neo from the Matrix dodging bullets, which seems like that would be, we'd have to just randomly pick all the spots that didn't have the contamination for that to be likely. The second scenario is they find contamination in the subsurface area. It is contamination that we understand and expect. It is contamination for which the appropriate mitigation measures are to install a geotextile membrane over the site and cover with additional fill of about 1 foot. That's scenario 2. Scenario 3 is basically that scenario, but potentially a little longer as we ascertain what the complicated nature of some of the potential contaminants are. And then scenario 4 would be the sort of worst case scenario, which is there's some very serious challenging chemicals there, and it will require remediation on site that will take years. We think we're much more likely to fall into the bucket number 2 or possibly bucket number 3, but we won't really know until we get the test results back.
And Tim, 3 was also that it might be in that topsoil layer as opposed to in just that base layer, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry. But 3, the idea would potentially be that Claxton would be usable in the future after some amount of remediation, like for a season. Whereas 4 is Claxton is not used for a decade or something.
And the soil has to get hauled away somewhere and all that stuff was what they were talking about.
Yeah. And so this is something we will discuss more, but the cost of testing has gone up quite a bit with each of the new requests that DEP has made. It will now use basically the full scientific expertise warrant article that the board asked me to request a few years ago. So we will be talking to the town manager and finance committee about re-upping that. But that was, this was the reason that we asked for that money to be available so that the board doesn't have to wait on finance committees taking a vote or wait on a special town meeting to appropriate money.
All right, so we're in charge of the budget here.
What's it?
We're in charge of the budget.
Yeah.
All right, so we put this out to bid.
So there is a statewide master service agreement, and we have Weston and Sampson that were under our contract. So we had done competitive procurement of them, yes.
All right, but now, I mean, we're increasing the scope and, they're kind of I just see only one bid here and you said the pricing is going up considerably. So I just didn't know if this piece went to bid.
So I don't think we can, in part because we had to do the work today. It's gone out to bid because we propose. Basically, when Weston and Sampson has done this work in other communities on burn dumps, they've very rarely found dioxins. So they said, we don't think we should test for dioxins, Needham. And Needham said, okay, we don't think we should test for dioxins, DEP, and DEP said, you must test for dioxins. So we said, okay, add that in. We're going to test on these sites. And they're like, well, we want these sites and these sites. So DEP has basically added extra levels on each time.
And that's why the price
has gone up from basically 32 to 49. So I think we're also we're trying to get the results as quickly as possible. I think we could have done a second request. Kathleen knows more about this than I do, but the number of companies that do this is relatively limited. The equipment is actually in high demand, which I think was the biggest challenge. I think Kathleen, you had said you had to wait 6 or 8 weeks.
Last year, I had to book months in advance with drill rig or rig sampling. I don't think you're gonna see a much better cost than this, I think. And if we're not, I mean, you can pay extra to expedite analyses, but that's double the price and things like that. So I don't think that, I mean, you could go out to bid, maybe save, a few, but I think Weston Sampson seems to be pretty competitive. I mean, off the top of my head, came up with close to the numbers before they added extra salaries.
Yes.
I expected it to be around at least 40,000.
So it's in the ballpark.
It's definitely in the ballpark.
As long as we're doing good diligence, that's all. I mean, otherwise, you know, we have to.
Yeah, like they don't have to holding you over the fire. I don't
Right.
feel like they're doing that. And they have a long-term relationship with us too, so they're not
Yes.
trying to, you know.
But we did actually, we were a little concerned about that, so we did actually sort of compartmentalize at the request of town council, we compartmentalized some of the negotiations, so it wasn't Weston and Sampson negotiating with DEP and, you know, sort of, not that they would do this, but just them telling DEP, oh, we should probably add a little extra testing here and a little something there and a little something, and then their scope of work is huge. We did the negotiating after the initial round, and went back and forth with DEP so that they didn't. The contractor wasn't setting the scope entirely. True.
And you pay for them to attend those meetings. I mean, the
Yeah.
more you guys can do, the better, you know, that we can do it in-house.
I think,
Although there weren't any questions yesterday about health, I'm sure we'll get that when we get the results, but. The thing I took away from the meeting yesterday is that people want this, you know, they recognize you've got a problem. They want to move forward to get it fixed.
They want to fix it and get it in place.
Right, so.
And they're sort of hoping at the levels are really low, so then they can do even more improvement. Better plan.
And there's a lot of passion about softball in this town.
yes,
Real bump with the pandemic, the interest in baseball and softball really increases. It's outside and some kids are do. So, yeah, which is good.
Well, I think we should proceed on this and we could, get as much testing done as is necessary and required by DEP. And then just move forward.
yes. So I will keep you informed as soon as I get results. There will be another community meeting. I'm sure if we do have results, there will be questions about what those results are.
But if we find dioxin there, that's gonna, that might make a big.
And that will come later. That sounds like that's a later result.
That's the longest test result, unfortunately, because it has to go out of state and there are limited labs that have the certification to test for that.
I doubt that.
Just some extra rocket fuel. That we did that in time. As you know.
Okay. So we'll leave the discussion of parks and field and move on to the regional field training upgrade.
Just, we have, posted for multiple positions. We're gonna be adding staff. We're also, as Tara mentioned, looking for a new environmental health agent. So we have a large and talented staff and we're gonna be adding to that. If you know of any good people, send them our way, because we do a lot more to try to attract people than we used to, and it still sometimes is not sufficient. We do paid postings, we do search firms, we do recruiters. We did all those things and we got Ginny, who was fantastic, but we got her because we emailed someone who she worked with. So we can pay as many people as we want, but sort of a good word of mouth, I think, is still our best recruiting tactic.
Okay. Any other items?
No guidance.
And our next meeting, one is scheduled for March 17, 8 to 10. And the next one after that is April 14, 9 to 11 a.m.
Yes, and I'll reach out to the board tomorrow with the doodle poll for the first week of March for a 1-hour meeting to talk about alcohol regulations.
We need to do that. All right, if there's nothing else, then can I have a motion to adjourn? So moved. Second on it. All those in favor? Opposed? Pass. Thank you.
Thank you.